board members, we need to choose individuals who are committed to academics, not indoctrination, and to honoring parental rights with transparency of what is taught and what children are exposed to. So there was a recent, very recent, Supreme Court ruling, Mohammed versus Taylor, and the parents won the case 6-3, so that was a pretty good victory. And the ruling imposes immediate requirements on public school districts nationwide. Schools must now provide advance notice when potentially objectionable content will be used, allow parents to have their children excused from instruction involving contested materials, apply strict scrutiny to policies that substantially interfere with or undermine religious beliefs parents want to instill. So Muhammad, this is the Supreme Court decision, establishes that parental rights claims involving religious exercise must be evaluated under strict scrutiny, which is the highest level of constitutional protection in the American law. Under this standard, a government must demonstrate that its policy advances interests of the highest order and is narrowly tailored to achieve those interests. And just in ending, I would say that it's now up to the parents to exercise their rights vigorously and their responsibilities to their children also diligently. But you guys have the same responsibility to not just to go along with the status quo, but to stand boldly and wisely with the best interests of the children under their parents' authority. Thank you.
Thank you very much. PK.
Good evening. Part of tonight's presentation is by Dana on the district finances, and it reminded me of a couple of questions that I think might be good to address, whether in today's meeting or a future meeting for the public about the district finances. One of those things is that if you look back at one of the board packets from a June meeting, there was an inclusion of a schedule of the total expenditures in the district per student, and then the total instructional expenditure per student, and it was for 301 in comparison to about 10 or 12 other school districts, all CUSDs in the northern Illinois area. And we had the lowest instructional expenditure per student compared to all of those districts, just about $7,000 per student. A lot of the surrounding districts are significantly higher. And even as a percentage of our total revenue, our total expenditure, it was sub 50%, and I think we were the only one that was spending less than half of the budget on instructional expense. And so that kind of stood out. So it would be helpful to understand, what's driving that. And then prospectively, as we look ahead to the next academic year and the year after that, do we expect that to remain the same or change, or are there things actions we can take to bring our expenses more in line with other districts? The assumption being that if we're not spending as much per student, then we may not be providing comparable services, educational services, to our population. So that's one question. The other question, this goes back to kind of something we do each year, which is the PTEL procedure, and that allows us to submit, a budget that is higher than the 5% cap on increasing the tax assessments, and it would be helpful, I think, just to have an explanation of like the motivation for that, right? People are very concerned about the tax bills, the size of the tax bills here versus in surrounding districts, and with it, continuously increasing more than 5% and going through administrative procedure to do that, I think providing a little bit more explanation for the motivation for that. What strategically does it allow the district to do by doing that, and is that actually translating into actual bills increasing greater than 5%, or is there some other purpose behind it? That would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, PK. All right, and with that, we will go on to
before we start rolling with
Yeah.
Dana on our financial presentation, in September, the board is going to be asked to adopt about a $90 million budget. And since we have 4 brand-new board members, we thought we'd start at least as early as we could, to give you an overview of school finance. On July 21st, we're going to have our auditors here. Implied in some of the past questions that have been raised by people in this community is some illegal activities going on. But we have auditors that every year go over everything for any illegal activity and the inappropriate transfer of funds. And all those questions should be addressed openly in a public setting. And that's what we're gonna do tonight, just by giving an overview of school finance, followed on the 21st with our auditors, a more discussion of why we do certain things and why certain things have been done in one way or the other in the past. So with that as a sort of that's the direction we're going. In August, you're gonna get a preliminary budget. Again, it's around $90 million. We're approaching a $100 million budget here. And then in September, by state law, you have to adopt the annual budget, the FY26 budget, 25-26 budget. So that's required, but before October 1, it has to be submitted to the state. So with that introduction, Daniel, want to give us the 30,000-foot view of school finance?
I can try. So,
And Jeff told me he's going to help you because he's been listening to this for how many years? Too many years.
Too many. Not as many as you.
Nobody has that many years. Go ahead, Dana.
so when tasked to try to come up with a presentation on how the budget works, Jeff's already heard this presentation because it's the same one I gave at the CAT meeting in February to kind of give the community, bless you, 30,000-foot view of the budget and how it works. So for the 3 of you at the table and the community listening, this is just a very high level. And as you're sitting here going through things, write notes, and then at the end, we can jot down notes. And if I can answer them, great. If not, I'll have the answers for you at the next board meeting, like Griff had just said. So at Central 301, we have 8 funds that we use within our budget. So each fund is like its own silo. Every one listed on here, the education fund has certain expenditures and it has a certain revenue that can go into that fund. So they're kind of like their own little houses that have purpose for what they have coming in and what they have going out. Some of the funds can be interchanged a little bit, like the operations and maintenance fund and the capital projects, those kind of go hand in hand. So what might be operation, maintenance, capital project could be in Fund 20 and it could be in Fund 60 and it could be split between the two. So there are some that can be kind of split. Others like IMRF, only IMRF can go in there and only IMRF levy can come out of there. So that is strictly just for the IMRF and Social
Can you
Security.
explain what IMRF represents?
Yes, I'm gonna go through every one of
Okay.
these in detail.
Huh?
Okay, I just want to okay. So the education fund,
Acronyms in education, that's why.
so the education fund is Fund 10. So with the state budget, there's a code and there used to be called an IPAM, which is a Illinois Counting Manual. I don't remember what the P stands for, but so that gives you a structure, a guideline on how to code certain account numbers. So anytime you see an account number that starts with a 10 in any school district in Illinois, it's going to be the education fund. So Fund 10 is education, and you'll see every fund, I list that at the top for that. Education fund is where all the salary and benefits come, except for the operation and maintenance, which is your custodials and your maintenance grounds crew. The transportation salaries are in the transportation fund. And then the IMRF and Social Security. The IMRF is the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund. So that is the retirement plan for school employees. TRS, which is the Teachers Retirement System, those benefits come out of this fund. But IMRF and Social Security come out of Fund 50. So this fund pays for all the instructional, everything textbooks, anything for the budget or the schools building budgets, any of the services that we have, any of the board, district office, anything else that kind of goes within there. And then the departments, which are listed below, I won't read them all to you, but it lists every single department that is included in the education fund. So that's where your special ed, your early childhood, your English language learners, your social workers. So all of those subgroups are included within this fund. food service, technology, tuition for special ed.
Good to go.
Okay, that was a lot. I didn't want to read them all, but, so the education fund, revenues come from all of these different buckets here. Our tax levy is our biggest revenue source for any school district. We get about 67 million in levy money for revenues that come in. 67 million comes in to us in total, so the levy is broken down by fund, so each fund has its own special dollar amount that it would go in there. And then the other big one is our evidence-based funding, which is a state-funded amount that comes in, and that we get roughly 14 million. And that also is split between the ed fund and the O&M fund, depending on how the budget lands. But here you can see the interest, our school lunches, our athletics, all the registration, all those fees come into this education fund. And then you got the grants, state and federal grants at the bottom. Our next fund is our operations and maintenance fund. This one is Fund 20. This is where all of Dan's crew, custodial, maintenance, grounds, everything salary and benefits related to them come into this account. All the services, our NICOR, our electricity, water, telephone, trash removal, all of those services, our security monitoring, our garbage, all of those kinds of things that's related to the building comes out of this fund. And then any major capital projects, if we can use this fund. The money that comes into this fund is our tax levy and our parking passes, because they pay for the repair of the asphalts and stuff. When we redo the parking lots, they pay for it, so we put the revenues back into that fund. Corporate personal property replacement tax, that it's an old, it's I think from the 80s. We get a very small amount. We get about 200,000. That revenue gets split into the O&M fund and Fund 50, so a portion of it needs to go into the IMRF fund, which we have to cover a certain amount out of that fund, and then all the rest would come into here. It's kind of like an interest, so that number fluctuates each year. And then evidence-based funding, which I said from the other one, can flow in here, and then we do apply for a school maintenance project grant every year. It's a $50,000 match. So every year we write it and we get approved, and so we have to at least spend $50,000 to get the $50,000. But it's an easy way to chunk off some of the smaller projects. The debt services fund, that is Fund 30. This is where our bonds and interest payments come out of. It's kind of like your mortgage. You have your principal and your interest. We have a schedule out to, I don't know, 2036 or something. So anything related to bonds, and then we do have a debt certificate out there. So the debt certificate, principal, and interest would also come out of here. We have, in the tax levy, there's a line item for Fund 30, which would pay for the bonds only. The interest income and impact fees, so when we get impact fees from the city of Elgin, those revenues come in and we put it to offset the debt certificate payment that we have. So debt certificates cannot be levied for. That has to come out of our own money. So when that decision was made back in 2016 to purchase those debt certificates, we did some bonds and we did a debt certificate. That debt certificate's roughly about $500,000 a year. That has to be paid out of money that's in this fund from interest income or those impact fees. So as the city of Elgin gives us those impact fees that we report out every month that you guys see, the first $500,000 goes into this fund to cover that payment, so that way we make sure we cover it, and then anything excess goes into the capital projects fund, which you'll see in like 2 more slides, I think. Transportation fund is the next fund. They're Fund 40. Anything related to transportation, the department, the salaries, the benefits, the fuel, the bus leases, it's kind of an easy department. Anything related to them goes into the transportation fund. Revenue that comes in for that is the tax levy. They get the interest, and then any field trips that we do. And then there are the state categoricals. The state categoricals are like what the state gives us back from our claims. So every year we file a transportation claim, and we file all of our expenditures, and then they roughly give you about 80% or 70% back the following year. So we would get, usually we get quarterly payments. In the past, they've been delayed, maybe get 3 of the 4 that you're owed. Sometimes you would get 2 of the 4, sometimes it would, they've been paying 4 for the last few years. But they're still in arrear 1 payment, so they pay 1 from the prior year, 3 from the current. So I'm not sure how that's going to play out over the next year, but that's what when you see state categoricals, it's like from the transportation claim. And it's based off of regular education and special education, so there's 2 different formulas of reimbursement for depending which type of transportation it is. Fund 50 is our Illinois Municipal Retirement and Social Security Fund. This is Fund 50. These are the benefits for the non-certified people, so the IMRF and the FICA taxes that are taken out come into this fund, and then Medicare for all employees. So teachers get Medicare taken out, so the whole entire district's Medicare is in this fund. Revenue from this fund comes from the tax levy, and then interest, and then here you see that corporate personal property tax again. So the remainder, I think we are putting about $60,000 into this fund, 60 to 70,000, and then the rest goes into the Fund 20, the O&M fund. Fund 60 is our capital projects fund. This fund is for major capital projects. There is no money that comes in for this fund. There's no levy. We do not levy for this fund. So the only way the money comes in here is from those impact fees that we get from the city of Elgin or Campton Township or whoever else that we might have impact fees. Those funds feed this account to build up to be able to do major capital projects. And then they do get interest. Every account gets interest. Fund 70 is a working cash fund. This one doesn't have expenditures. It's more used for loans or transfers to other funds when needed. This one, there is a very small levy that goes in there. I think it's about $100,000 a year that goes into this fund to kind of just grow it as like a fund that's there for being able to transfer to O&M if a major project came up that we couldn't afford. You could transfer money through a board resolution and move money if we needed to.
But a board has to pass a resolution to do so.
Correct.
That's a key point.
Absolutely, yep.
Yep.
It's a 2-month process.
It's not something done by
No.
administration.
Absolutely, no. Legal would have to be involved, and then, yeah, we would have resolutions.
Right.
Yep. And then our last fund is our tort fund. This is Fund 80. This is where all of our insurance costs come in, so everything from our work comp, our property and casualty, so like all of the boilers and all of the buildings and our cyber liability, everything falls under that property and casualty. We have unemployment insurance for our employees, and then all of our legal bills from our lawyers go into this fund. And then we do levy for this, and their interest income comes in here. So sources of revenue, this shows you a slide of our revenues coming in from local, state, and federal. So here you can see it's a list of all the different things that I was mentioning earlier. So you can see based on local, state, and the revenue buckets. So federal, you can see there's all of our grants. And then the state revenues, you see there's the evidence-based funding at the top. And then there's more grants, special ed grants at the bottom. And then the transportation one that I was talking to earlier. And let me so local makes up about 77% of our budget. And state is 21%, and federal is about 2%. So when they're talking federal cuts, it's only 2%. It's not as scary, but it is still a lot of money. So the National School Lunch Program, we get quite a few dollars from, and then our IDEA grant, we get over $1 million from it. So it's not that it's not significant, but it is a smaller portion of our revenues. This is just a graph of the prior slide that shows you, if you're more a picture person, the local property taxes, you can see, is 70% of our revenue. So a majority of it comes from our property taxes. And then you can see there's your other local, which is 7%. Your evidence-based funding is 16%. And then your state and federal are 5 and 2 over there. So overall, our expenditures for the operating funds, so operating funds are every fund except for the bond fund and the capital project fund. All of those funds, you can see that our 63% is salaries and benefits of the budget. So a lot of times it's between 60 and 70% of the budget is salary and benefits. That's just where a majority of our expenditures are. And then all other ones are in the 30s, is 37%. So total expenditures by fund for last year's budget, 71% is in the ed fund. So this just shows you another graphic picture of how much the ed fund supports all of the, or I mean, how much the ed fund is compared to all the other funds. And then part of what else I'd like to just share, this is our bond payment schedule. So this is where our bonds are. So if you look at the yellow row, that is our current fiscal year. And if you go over to the, the total column, it says 8.6 million. So that's our bond payment for this school year. So that's what we paid this fiscal year for bonds. Next year, we're paying a total of $9 million for bonds. And then the following year, in 2027, we dropped to 1.6 million. So the bonds that we've been borrowing over time, we paid off our 2006 bonds, we refinanced the 2013 bonds. So that's what we're paying off, and then all that we have left is our 2017 bonds that are up there. So you'll see a big drop if you look at, keep going to the right, the bond and interest tax rate at the far right column. That shows you we're at 87 cents for the bond and interest. So in the levy, you have your regular $5, like $5 or $6 for your tax percent, and then there's a bond and interest one. So it breaks it out at 87 cents. And then you'll see that it goes to 90, so there'll be a slight little blip next year going up for that bond and levy amount, and then it drops to 18 cents. So there's a huge drop there. So there will be savings on people's tax bills because we're down to the last bond on that schedule.
And that's usually when districts like to pass referendums.
That would
when
be
the tax
primo.
impact is neutral.
Yes, and that was the intent. That's
That
what
was
we were
part of your
shooting
plan.
for.
Right.
But we won't make it now. So there will be some tax savings benefits there in people's eyes. And then this slide is a little bit more detailed. This was what was also shared out when we were doing the 2024 referendum. This was trying to show you that if we were to go out in multiple stages, the reason that we were trying to get the referendum passed is to not, exactly like Dr. Powell just said, to not let that drop happen, because then you get used to that huge savings, which is nice. As a taxpayer myself, I would love to see that savings, but then to come back in 3 years and say, now I need more money to build something, and it's going to cost more at that time, it's a little bit harder to swallow. So trying to kind of keep that level as we could for the project that we were out proposing for. This was just kind of showing you the scenarios of not doing it all at once either, like breaking up into 3 separate years to kind of stretch the borrowing out a little bit more, just to keep it as level. And this slide was just kind of attempting to do that for that reason. So and this was PMA's projections when we were doing that referendum. And that's all that I had from a huge high-level view. So when we work on the budget we have, when I was talking about that accounting manual, there's certain sections of the account. So the account structure has its fund, it has its function, it has its object, it has its source. It has different sections of this account number, and each section is related to this manual that's used as a guide as to, the 1130 means it's a high school account, and if wherever that number falls in any school district, if you see that 1130 in that section for the function, it would mean high school related. So they don't have every single scenario out there, but they have like elementary, middle school, high school. So you can keep going down in some of the account numbers. You can get to the granular levels of how far you want to go by department, by whatever. So there is some sort of guidance, and on the website, you'll see my spreadsheet of my working budget. It breaks it down by every department, every salary, benefit, services. It goes through every single section. And then that ultimately gets loaded into what's called the ISB 5036 form. So that is the state budget form, and it's multiple tabs on a spreadsheet that it fills in, and it kind of summarizes all of that. But that goes to, by those functions, if the high school's 1120 or 1130 and middle school's 1120, every one of those different amounts feeds into the budget and kind of summarizes and collapses some of the accounts, so you don't have, you don't have 80 million of them. But that budget then gets uploaded to the state, and that's how you get your final budget.
There's a test on this later. Are you ready?
Answer is C.
Well, one of the things that boards ask, how can we control the budget? Well, 70% is staffing. Every time we come to you and we ask you to approve a personnel report, that's an expenditure. And many districts, for example, have set as a practice hiring new teachers, more right out of college with a few years' experience, because teachers make more money with years' experience and degrees. So I think in the past practice here has been to work to try to keep the new teachers, you've got to have a lot of new smiling faces in front of your kids. That's one reason a lot of districts do that, is to keep the costs down. In fact, in the contract for teachers, when they retire, they get 4-6% increases. It helps their annuity in retirement for the rest of their lives. So that's a benefit that they've negotiated here. Well, how do we pay for that benefit? Well, after letting somebody go at $100-some thousand a year, you hire a teacher at $50,000 a year as a replacement. That's how you come up with the savings. And that's a practice done in almost all the districts in the state of Illinois. But to me, 70% of all your costs are staffing and the hiring of teachers, hiring administrators. There's your big cost. I know there's been a lot of discussion here. It's been focused on purchasing of land and a number of other construction things. But the focus in terms of long-term is staffing. And you make decisions every single month regarding staffing. And you will tonight. And then we have situations like in special ed, where it's almost impossible to find staffing or teachers, because there's a shortage of teachers in special education and English as a second language, and there's a whole number of areas that we have a hard time. Matt could go on for a long time on this. He struggles with it every single day. So, questions? Again, we're going to follow this up with our auditors on the 21st. Questions you have for the auditors, as Dana said, if you have any follow-up questions of what she just presented, we need to hear them.
While they're thinking, I'll kind of ask a couple questions, and again, forgive me if some of these questions are very basic. When you were talking about revenues coming in, so whether it's the tax levy or for EBF, is the percentages that go into those specific funds, is that,
Evidence-based funding, the average person has no idea what you're
sorry
talking
about, I'm still learning that.
Yeah.
That's something new
Well,
to
you're
me.
getting a little quite a way down the line. You're using that terminology. Go ahead.
The percentages of that revenue that comes in, is it dictated by some sort of governance as to where that money goes, the percentage that goes into each of those accounts? Or is that something that we decide as a district based on our expenditures? So when we get that tax levy money, is there some sort of, I don't know what the right word is. Is there something that dictates how much that goes into each fund? Or is that our decision as a district based on what we know our expenditures out of those funds are going to be?
So the tax levy, which you guys will learn in November when we do the tax levy, November and December is when we do bring the tax levy, we bring a tentative, and then we bring the final in. Those, you'll see that the request that we ask for is broken out by each of those funds.
Okay.
So it might say there's 28 million in the ed fund, 7 million in special ed, like it breaks down every single thing. And so based on the formula and the calculations of all of the tax levy, it dictates and tells you this fund must be here. The only
Okay.
one that is, there's a revenue recapture it's a newer thing that basically the timing of receipts and people can dispute their taxes, stuff like that. That money comes back and you can kind of designate where you want it. Right now, we're putting it back into the O&M fund, the capital, or in Fund 20, which is where maintenance is. We just put it in there.
Okay.
So that was the only one that's really, you probably could put it in the ed fund if you wanted to, or O&M,
O&M, operations and maintenance.
operations and maintenance, sorry,
Yeah.
sorry.
The average person thinks we're talking another language, I know.
And then for the EBF, is that the same?
EBF is based on another huge calculation that the state will hopefully give us, usually in the beginning of August. And they'll say there's different tiers. So there's 4 different tiers for evidence-based funding. Right now, we're in Tier 1, so we're considered one of the poorest schools. So we do get a bigger amount for evidence-based funding. So in the past, just a little history, it used to be called general state aid. And there was a whole different formula. It was based on enrollments and another whole different calculation. And then that flipped over probably about 4 years ago. So for maybe 6 years ago, maybe it was right before COVID. So that was, we weren't getting a lot of money under that formula. Then when we flipped to evidence-based funding, we were in Tier 3, and we were getting about $100,000, $200,000 for the first 3 or 4 years of that new formula. But then we switched to Tier 1. So evidence-based funding is that $350 million you hear that the state approved. $50 million usually goes to this property tax relief grant. So there's $300 million that goes to the schools. So that $300 million gets split up by the tiers. And I think 90% of that $300 million goes to Tier 1 schools. Then the Tier 2 schools get a percent, Tier 1 gets a percent of it, plus then all of the Tier 2 get the what's left. So by the time you get to Tier 3 and 4, there's no money left. So it's
Based on need.
it's based on adequacy targets and need and your other revenues coming in. So there's multiple things that go in there. There are buckets that tell you that they recommend a certain amount goes towards special ed, English language learners, a very small amount for tech, and Title I. So the amounts that are broken out in there, we spend way more money in those buckets than what's supposed to be earmarked for them. So there's a little bit of guidance for those ones, just to make sure that you never get below those, but no, you can use it in really any fund that you need.
Little history lesson, when Public Law 94-142, which is the demand special education, passed in the 1970s, in the federal government promises 40% of all costs would be paid by the federal government. Currently, I think we're at like 10 to 12% in terms of federal supporting through IDEA. And that's quite a change from what the intent of the law was. So local taxpayers are paying more and more, and they have for the last 20 or 30 years. So just a reality. Not a good one. But that forces local taxpayers in their property tax to pay it. And that's not going to get any better. I know, Donnie Downer, sorry. It's a reality.
Chatterstock, you guys have any questions?
Not right now.
Sorry, one more question, and it's simply because I don't understand. With the debt certificate that you were talking about, where we take the impact fees from Elgin, and it's $500,000 a year, is there a limit on that debt certificate? Does that expire at some point where we won't be putting money into that, or is that just kind of? Can you explain that a little bit more for me?
Yes, I don't remember if it's on this schedule, if I can read this. I don't think it's on here because this was just bonds, not debt certificates. So that was, I think, in 2016. I don't remember the exact term of it, but I do think there's probably 3 years left.
Okay.
So then it will be done, and then that full amount could go anywhere,
Okay.
unless we have new debt.
Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much. Thank
Yep.
you. All right. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And we are.
We only have a few minutes before we start we have to go into closed session.
So,
But,
go ahead, you can.
no, one thing we could do is table our action items until after closed session. And maybe we want to take a break before we start our interviews.
Yeah,
Because I did bring food for the board, because we did force you to start at 5 o'clock. And I figure you may want some of these, so we have some salad, some pizza here for you. So
Okay.
you could take a bite to eat, and before we get into 9 different interviews, right? 8?
Nine interviews that we have. So yeah, out of respect for our candidates that are going to be interviewing, I think I'll ask for I'm going to need a motion in a second,
Motion
right?
to table.
A motion and a second to table our action reports till after we come out of closed session.
So moved. Second.
Yeah, can I get a roll call for that, please?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Let's take a little break, and then we can go into closed session. Take the motion, go into closed session.
Yeah, we'll make the motion. Okay.
Pardon me?
So I'll make the motion first and then go into close? Or do you want to take a break before?
We want to take a break, because
Okay.
eating is not part of closed session activity. I know you thought it was, but it's not in the law.
All right.
Do the motion to go into closed session, though.
Well, it could go into motion, but
We can do
I'm
the
just
motion.
joking about the eating.
Right.
So, yeah, we'll do that. We'll go ahead and, can I get a motion in a second to go, to adjourn open session and move into closed session? And then,
Moved. Second.
and roll call, please.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes. So we'll be moving into closed session now.
Right. We got about 5 minutes before our first
break? We got 5
person, so please